I'm Ryan. I'm a science teacher.
I'm Cheryl, and I slept through science.
Each episode will tackle a science question you may have learned in school, but can't quite remember or fully explain.
And I'll take the risk of asking the dumb questions so that we can all understand the science we slept through.
The bell has rung. Let's get started. Welcome to Lesson 6.
Lesson 6.
The sixth lesson.
Yes. And
Comes
in
after the
this
fifth one.
sixth lesson, Ryan,
Yes,
I have a
Cheryl.
question for you
Okay.
that I don't even know if I have a hunch of what the answer is.
Okay.
Why is the ocean salty?
So, true confessions here, Cheryl.
Yes.
I didn't know the answer to this question either and had to do a little bit of research.
Is it because it's magic?
No.
Okay. Is
It's
that
not.
ever going to be the answer?
Maybe. Possibly at some point in the future it might be.
Okay.
Okay, so why is the ocean salty? And I think that is an excellent question. And I know you just said that you may not have any ideas at all, but let me see if I can kind of tease out at least some concepts or ideas. So let's talk about when we say that the ocean is salty, what do you think that even means?
That the water is salt water as opposed to like a lake or a river, which is not salt water.
Okay. And what do you think salt water is?
Water with salt in it?
Okay. I know it sounds silly, but like,
yes.
Do you think it's the same type of salt like that you would put on your food?
Well, it's sea salt.
Okay.
Because like my brother-in-law actually, I don't know how he did this. Maybe he got a bucket of water and let it evaporate. And then he like gave me a little jar of sea salt that I used to cook with. And I was like, oh, this is different than like my table salt or something like that.
Do you remember what was different about it?
No.
Okay.
And I don't even know if I could taste the flavor difference, but I was very excited about cooking with sea salt.
Okay.
And I know that the Dead Sea is really salty, like more salty than the ocean, because I hear about how people can like float in it really easily, which is probably a separate subject as far as like why would salt make someone float?
I feel like you should add that to our list.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
But I don't know if the Dead Sea is a lake or if it's like attached to an ocean, because I don't know, like, are there salty lakes? Or is it just a part of an ocean that's like a little inlet area and that's why they call it the Dead Sea? But so I know it's not like equal salt amount everywhere because of that. It depends on the area, I guess.
Okay. Any ideas where the salt might come from?
Well, I'd wonder about like other things that are in the ocean, maybe that are producing salt, because there's all sorts of stuff in the ocean. There's clams, there's whales, there's seaweed, and there's many, many, many more things. And I'm assuming all of those things like living in a salty environment. I don't know what they're drinking. Do they need hydration? And how can salt water be hydrating to them? But that's probably also a separate question.
Yep. Also separate question.
Do whales drink water? But like, obviously they all like living in a salty environment, but I don't know, like, are one of those things producing the salt, or is it like from the depths of the ocean and like the land that the ocean is in, or that the ocean water is in? Because it probably doesn't come from the sky. It doesn't come from rain, because it's not like rain knows if it's raining over the ocean or over a lake to be salty or not. So it has to come from something to do with the earth then.
See, you had lots of ideas. Here you're like, I don't know anything. I filled a whole page like normal of ideas that you had.
Oh, yay. That's exciting.
That is exciting. Cheryl, as usual, your ideas are already thinking about the right things.
Yay! So we are going to talk about if whales drink water. I'm so excited.
Not today. We won't talk about that today.
Okay.
But you've got a lot of ideas that are going to help you understand why the ocean is salty.
Nice.
So let's start by talking about kind of what I asked, like what is salt? Like, so when we talk about it being salty, what does that even mean in the first place? And the short answer is it's just salt, the same stuff that you would use on your food. It's sodium
Oh,
chloride. It's called table salt,
okay.
right? And you can write that as capital N, lowercase a, capital C, lowercase l. So Na is for sodium. That's the atomic symbol for sodium. And Cl is for chlorine,
Oh, okay. Very
right?
cool.
So NaCl, sodium chloride, table salt.
So when my brother-in-law gave me that sea salt, it just seems fancy smanchy, but really it's all just salt.
Correct. My
Okay.
understanding, and I would need to go do a little bit more research for this, but my understanding is the difference in sea salt versus table salt has to do with the way it crystallizes. And so, like the size of the flakes more than the actual
Oh.
composition from like atoms or things.
Okay, so I can still be fancy when I use my fancy salt to cook with.
Absolutely. You can still be fancy.
Wonderful. That's all I wanted to hear.
Okay. Um, And so here, though, you actually referenced a couple of things like where does that salt ultimately come from?
Mhm.
And the answer is there's really two main sources. And you actually referenced both of them already.
Yes!
But one of them you said this can't be the source.
The rain.
Yeah.
But how can it?
So here's how it, and it's not directly the rain because your thinking is correct. The rain itself doesn't have the salt in it when it's falling.
Okay.
However, as a raindrop falls through the air, it picks up a little bit of what's in the air. And some of the things that are in the air are carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Now, when you dissolve carbon dioxide in water, it makes the water slightly acidic.
Oh.
Now, there's just a normal amount that it'll do that isn't a big deal. So we're not talking about like acid rain, like was a big thing several years ago. Like that
Yeah.
is a real thing. That's not what we're talking about.
Okay.
Anything that isn't pure water is probably a little bit acidic or a little bit basic.
Okay.
Okay. So just because something might be a little acidic doesn't all of a sudden mean it's toxic and it's terrible and you need to be afraid. Okay. But what it does mean is when it falls onto rocks, it has the ability to ever so slightly break them down at a chemical level.
So why isn't that happening in like a lake with a rock in it?
Great question. That's the perfect next question. And the answer is it is happening in a lake and in a river, but that water is flowing. So there's a little tiny bit that of these like salts, right? Some of it is sodium and chlorine and other minerals and things as well that get dissolved out of rocks, and they are in a lake or a river.
Oh.
But
Okay.
those, think of like a river will like run downstream from a mountain. Often
Yeah.
it will feed into a lake
Yeah.
of some kind, but most lakes feed into other rivers that all eventually wash into the ocean. And
So they're
so,
less different than I thought they were.
yes.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
the source is actually coming from lakes and rivers. And technically, lakes and rivers do have a measurable amount of salt in them. It's just much, much tinier.
Okay.
But then they all run down into the oceans, and the oceans
Don't go
don't feed
anywhere.
into anywhere else.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
the water
Okay.
does evaporate from the oceans,
Okay.
and water evaporates, but salts do not.
Oh, so just like how he made the sea salt by getting a bucket of water and waiting for the water to evaporate, and then you just
Yep.
have a ton of salt
Yep.
and no water. And then if it rained in there again, you'd still just have your salt water.
Mm-hmm. Because the salt isn't going to
Oh,
go anywhere. So every time you're adding new bits of
oh,
salt, the salt is, for the most part, just staying in the ocean. The water will go through the water cycle, right? And evaporate and condense and do all of those things again, right? But the salt, once it flows into the ocean, it just stays there.
It never gets to travel again.
It doesn't
And the
really get to
water
travel again.
loves it and goes on all sorts of adventures. And the salt's just like, I guess I live here now.
I
This
guess
is
I
where I
just hang out
live
here.
and never
Mhm.
die because
Yep.
salt doesn't die.
Yep. And actually,
Mm.
this gets at another example that you mentioned, which is the Dead Sea.
Okay. Is it a lake or an ocean?
It's a lake.
Okay.
It's a big lake,
Okay.
but it's a lake. And the reason that the Dead Sea has such a high salt concentration, which by the way, I looked this up. So the ocean has about 3.5% is like salt,
Okay.
to give you an idea, like how
Okay.
salty it is. And the Dead Sea has like almost 34% salt. So like 10 times almost.
I totally want to go float in the Dead Sea. That sounds so
Me
fun.
too. Me too. But here's the thing. The same process is happening with the Dead Sea, except the Dead Sea doesn't feed into anything else, just
Oh,
like the ocean.
got it.
And the Dead Sea is in the kind of Israel, Jordan, kind of Middle East area, which
Mhm.
is very hot. So the water that feeds in evaporates out
Mm,
and just leaves behind. Obviously, there's still some water in it, but it leaves behind a lot of that salt as it comes in because the Dead Sea
wow.
is also very, very low in elevation.
Yeah, I had heard something about its elevation and how that made a
Yeah.
difference as well.
Yeah. And that's why the water does, because the only reason water flows is because of gravity.
Yeah, it doesn't just want to flow on its own.
Yeah, you're not going to see a river flow uphill.
Yeah, or even like on like a neutral, like a flat plane.
Yeah, not so much. It
Yeah,
pretty much is, yeah, going to have some sort of like incline to
yeah.
do that. So why the Dead Sea is salty is essentially the same reason that the ocean is salty.
Interesting.
It's just a
Wow.
smaller version of that.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Now, I did tell you that there were two sources of the salt, and I've only
Yes.
talked about one so far.
Yeah, and I have a second guess for the other one. I was
Okay, go
thinking
for it.
about how when we sweat, our sweat produces salt. There's like
Hmm.
our sweat can be salty or
Hmm.
is salty. So I'm gonna say it's whale sweat.
That is a good idea.
Thank you.
It is not correct,
Oh
however,
man.
because whales wouldn't need to sweat because they're in the water.
But when people swim, they sweat
This is
in
true.
the
And
water.
technically, that would contribute to a little bit of salt in the ocean, not enough for us to measure appreciably when it comes to the size of the entire ocean compared to
A
a human
person, yeah.
or even a beach full of people. But you did reference that you talked about it had to come from the land that the water is in.
Yes.
And that is correct. So
Cool.
actually, the other source are deep sea vents where ocean water deep underneath will actually filter kind of through the crust of the earth and get kind of deep kind of into the crust and sometimes get heated up because it's getting closer to the not the center of the earth. I mean, technically it is closer to the center, but it's not very close to the center. Just a lot closer where it can get some of that heat from
Okay.
inside the earth. And that can cause the water to help dissolve minerals and salts out of the rock. And then it can come back up through deep sea vents
Oh,
and
okay.
contribute some of those minerals and salts back into the ocean from a deeper level.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, I
That's
thought so
really
too.
cool. And you got to learn something new.
I did, because
That's
I
really
was not
cool.
100% sure about that either. But
Oh, you
so,
also thought it was whale sweat. Yeah.
uh-huh, that's
Mhm. Yeah.
definitely what I said.
Yeah.
Yep, whale sweat. All right, Cheryl, it's time for your quiz.
Okay. I'm ready.
All right, first question. What are the two sources of salt in the ocean?
Um, one is indirectly from the rain because the rain breaks down things in rocks which produce salt, which then put it in rivers and lakes, which eventually dump it into the ocean.
Okay, that works.
And then deep sea vents or something about deep vents, which just makes me picture the ocean as a giant hot tub, which sounds
Mhm,
really fun.
mhm.
And because there is heat coming deep down in the ocean from the earth, it is breaking down some of those things in the rocks and then producing salt and then shooting up into the vent into the rest of the ocean.
Excellent. Okay, so following up with that, you mentioned that the rain can dissolve like salt and things out of rocks. Why is it able to do that?
Oh no. Because there's something. Oh gosh. Did you say that part? Oh
Briefly.
no.
It's okay.
Um there's something in the water that dissolves. Well, it's just water, but like it dissolves other things, or is it the things in the air that the rain picks up with it and then dissolves? It is because there's other stuff in the air. And as the rain is falling through the air, it's picking up all sorts of stuff, and then those stuffs dissolve the rocks ever so slightly.
Half credit.
Okay,
Because
because I
yes,
didn't say what it
but
was.
it's okay. Well, and the key piece to it was whether or not you remembered exactly what it picked up.
Uh-huh.
Like it's carbon dioxide, but
Okay.
it makes the water in a raindrop slightly acidic.
Okay. Yes.
And that
Okay.
was kind of the key piece with that. So whether or
Acid
not you
rain
remembered
was
what it
the
was,
answer. Yep. That horrific acid rain
right?
that
Yeah.
everyone's scared
Hmm.
of. Hmm. Yep.
Hmm. That's definitely it. Okay. Why do oceans have more salt in them than lakes and rivers?
Because lakes and rivers are moving and dumping into other things, and the ocean, there's nowhere to go.
Great. Okay. Last question, which will be more of an application question.
Oh boy.
So in Utah, there is the Great Salt Lake.
That was the other. I was thinking of a Salt Lake in the US and I couldn't think of
Yep.
the Salt Lake. Okay.
It's
Yeah.
called the Great Salt
And
Lake.
there's Salt Lake City.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
In Utah. And it has, depending on which part of the lake, between 14% and 31% salt
Hmm.
compared to the 3.5% salt in the ocean.
Yeah.
Why do you think the Great Salt Lake has a higher concentration of salt than the ocean?
Well, I mean, I think it'd be the same reasons as the Dead Sea, that it's not dumping into anything else. So the water isn't escaping or like going anywhere. And then I also think it might have to do with the elevation, similar to the Dead Sea. I'm trying to think if there's any other like differences. Are there extra rocks there that are super salty? I'm going to go with my first answer, but yeah.
Yeah, no, you got it. Yeah, it doesn't drain anywhere.
Cool.
Now,
Interesting.
and as I was doing some research for this episode, I also didn't know this, but it's actually the Great Salt Lake is actually a small leftover of what used to be even gianter Salt Lake that was there.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you've heard of like the Bonneville salt flats, they sometimes will do like land races there. Sometimes you'll see like on documentaries where they try to race things. It's like big and white and flat and big. That was all part of a big giant salt lake at one point in time in
So
the
that's
past.
how a salt flat exists, is because it used to be water
It used to be
and
water.
then the
Yep.
water evaporated.
Hmm. Yep. The water, whether it heated
Interesting.
up or whatever. And so, and because at the base of a salt lake, like there is a saturation point where water can only dissolve so much salt. And beyond that
Mm,
point, it can no longer dissolve salt. So any extra salt beyond that doesn't dissolve. And so it just kind of floats to the bottom. And so you can get deposits of salt at the very bottom of a salt lake or a salt sea.
that makes a lot of sense. It's like when you put too much of that country time lemonade powder into water and
Yeah.
eventually it won't dissolve.
That is actually the exact same thing. You got it. Good connection.
Cool. Now we know, Ryan.
Now we know.
Yay. Very
There's
exciting.
There's only a few more minutes left of the period, so why don't you go ahead and pack up your stuff while you get ready for my closing remarks. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at I Slept Through Science or on Twitter at Slept Science.
If you have dumb science questions like I do, please send them to us. You can email us at isleptthroughscience@gmail.com, or you can even send us a voice memo and we'll play it on the podcast.
Please rate and review our podcast to tell other people what you think about it, subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode, and share about our podcast on social media.
Thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye.
The bell doesn't dismiss you. I dismiss you.